Hello, Zero community, and welcome to today's webinar, Bring Your Advocacy Home. We are here today to talk about what it means to advocate in your own backyard, right? We appreciate that so many of you have come to DC for the summit or at other times, have joined us for virtual Hill Days, and have sent emails, made phone calls, a million ways to make contact with your elected officials. But we're here today to talk about an opportunity that it's available year-round, but it's especially available during the month of August. So August is the month that traditionally Congress is on recess. Congress, for anyone who's ever been to DC, in fact, I think next week it's supposed to hit 100 degrees and probably 90% humidity for the first time in 7 years. August is uniquely swampy and grubby in DC, and dating back from the days before air conditioning, we know that members of Congress would traditionally head home for that August recess, spend that time with their constituents in their own districts, hearing from their communities, and avoiding DC's miasma. So August recess begins actually at the end of this week. Congress is not in session, and it's a great time for you to set up meetings with your members of Congress in their district visits. So every representative, every senator has district offices. Sometimes they have more than one, depending on how large their state or district is. And those are offices where they have their own staffs, they have their own setup. They mostly handle more specific constituent issues, but they also take policy meetings with constituents who are not traveling to DC for one reason or another. It's a really great chance when the member's in town to actually meet with the member. I think those who have come to the summit know that you don't often get to meet the member when you're in Washington, DC. They have a lot happening. They have votes to get to. They have committee hearings and meetings. But once they're at home in August, they've got a lot more time for you. And it's just a really great opportunity to capitalize on in a way that hopefully doesn't require you to travel, right? Or to have to find other ways to have these conversations. So it is a great chance to continue to grow your advocacy on behalf of the prostate cancer community. The most important thing here to remember is that, and I love this phrase, we want our advocates to be persistent and consistent, right? We want you to show up every year for the summit. We hope you can click through on those action alerts that you receive every time, right? We want your name and hopefully your face to be familiar to your member of Congress and to their staff. It saves you time and energy, right? It means you don't have to introduce yourself as thoroughly. You can build more of a rapport. It's a chance to build a relationship, and relationships, of course, are a large part of how we're successful. So having that meeting in your own congressional district, right, back at home, is a really great way to make sure that they know who you are. It also helps, get to know each other's faces. If you run into each other at the grocery store, maybe it's at church, maybe it's a sporting match, right? That you've got building what are really meaningful relationships. Now, I want to talk a little bit about an advocate who unfortunately is not able to be with us right now, but who has gone ahead and done this. Joni Lowe has come to the summit to advocate in DC before. Joni lost her husband to prostate cancer a few years ago, and she wanted the chance to carry on his legacy, right? To tell his story, to make lemons out of lemonade, or lemonade out of lemons, I apologize. And to really use that to help others who might be diagnosed in the future. And so in addition to attending the summit in DC, right, making that trip, Joni has also reached out to her member of Congress back in her own district in California. And she was telling me about it a little bit the other day. And she said, I looked up the website. I went to see what the closest district office was for me. I made the phone call and I asked for the health staffer. And she said she was a little bit nervous, right? I suppose my generation in particular, or my generation and younger, doesn't love picking up the phone and making an unexpected phone call. Maybe most of us don't do as much of it anymore as we used to, but you pick up the phone, call the office, ask to speak to the health staffer, and find time to come in. And if possible, ask if you can meet with the boss when they're going to be in town. So Joni did that. Last year, we were advocating for a bill called the PC Care Act, and Joni had attended this webinar last year. She had the materials that we supplied. And she was able to have that conversation in a relatively knowledgeable way, right? You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be an expert at this. But most importantly, she was able to share her husband's story and her family's story and talk about why the policy priorities she was talking about could have made a difference for them, right? Why it was important, why she believed that we needed the congressman's support. She was able to ask for it. And then she actually followed up a couple of weeks later, right? We love, again, persistence and consistency. She followed up a couple of weeks later, and the staffer she spoke with was able to tell her that, yes, in fact, they had co-sponsored that piece of legislation. So Joni had gotten an additional co-sponsor, and building co-sponsors, that's how we build support in DC. That's how we show the number of members of Congress who support an idea, support a policy, and help us to move it forward once we reach a critical mass. So I'm sorry that Joni's not here to join us, but I know that she wanted me to tell everyone that it was a little nerve-wracking, but the fact is it was pretty straightforward. It was very doable, and it really was a satisfying opportunity to carry on her husband's legacy. So there are a couple of steps to this process. You're going to request a meeting. You're going to prepare wildly with the materials we've given you and with some of what we're going to talk about later. You'll show up in person, make your ask, send a thank you and a follow-up, and then let us know how it went. And that is not the most important part, but I'll say it's pretty darn important. If you can get us follow-up information, it allows us to answer questions that perhaps you didn't have the answers to follow up again with that office and remind them that they had a conversation with the constituent and try to push them to, follow through on what you discussed, right? It lets us kind of wrap up the job. So I'm going to hand it off now to Hal, who's going to explain the process of requesting a meeting.
We've heard how important, this is, and, and also we've gone over some of the experiences, in the past. So how do we actually request, a meeting? Well, thankfully, this is probably the easiest part of this whole process. So every member of Congress has their own website. It looks kind of like this. Every member of Congress has something a little different, but but generally, if you go onto the website, which is usually the first result on Google, where there will be a contact a tab, and then you go onto the contact tab, and you just fill out your information. It's really that simple. Your name, your address, the location of the meeting. And what you want to do, and this is very important, is to mention that you are a constituent, because that is your key to getting a meeting. Because while I myself, any kind of staffer, they aren't obligated to go meet with me. Of course, it would be very nice for them to go and do so, but you though, they're obligated to go and meet you. Which is why it is so important to mention how you are a constituent. And so, so if you don't want to go and and fill out a whole form, you can go on their website and call them. You can see here how how this is just a quick example. You can see how there are phone numbers for both other district offices and their DC office. And if you just call them and say, "Hey, I'm a constituent, I would like a meeting," and they'll get you all set up, and they'll, generally within a couple business days, they'll respond to you via an email, or if you call them, they'll go and respond right away. So again, it's a very simple process, and it takes just a few minutes.
Zero has been on a journey to ensure that we are eliminating what is in fact the biggest disparity in cancer. Prostate cancer affects Black men at 1.8 times. They're 1.8 times as likely to be diagnosed with prostate cancer, 2.1 times as likely to die. And there is no way in the world that we end prostate cancer without closing those gaps, right? Without ensuring that no matter who you come from, what you look like, what your name is, that you are able to face prostate cancer with the same odds as your neighbor down the street or 2 towns or states over. So health equity At zero is defined as everyone having a fair and just opportunity to prevent, find, treat, and survive prostate cancer. One of the ways that we attempt to address this health disparity is a bill called the PSA Screening for Him Act. The PSA for Him Act, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Dylan to talk about this a little bit.
Sure. So our zero's top policy priority right now, because of in large part what Ali was discussing in terms of health equity, is a bill called the Prostate Specific Antigen Screening for High Risk Insured Men, PSA Screening for Him. Sometimes we'll call it PSA for Him Act. In the House, it's been introduced as HR 1826 by Congressman Larry Bucshon from Indiana and Yvette Clarke from New York. It's a bipartisan bill. What it does is essentially for insured men who have a family history of prostate cancer, genetic markers, or African American men, requires insurers to cover the PSA test with no copay, cost sharing, and deductibles. The mechanism that we do that through is by requiring insurers to treat the PSA test as if it has an A or a B from a body known as the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, which under the Affordable Care Act ties their recommendations to insurance coverage. There's a lot of history there that you don't need to get into the weeds on, but that is how we get at it. So in 2018, USPSTF updated its recommendation. The PSA screening used to have a D. Now it has a C rating. We need to treat it like an A or a B in order to get it covered without a copay by insurance companies, or in order to require them to. The recommendation in 2018 acknowledged that there was gaps in the data related to high-risk populations, including African Americans and men with a family history, due to the lack of enrollment in clinical trials. These are trials that take a long time, they're expensive, and there are ethical concerns about how you have to run them. So in order to get that data, it would take a long time, and we know through what we've seen since they have recommended essentially against screening that metastatic disease has gone up and deaths have gone up. So we've seen enough to make the change, and that's what the bill does. There's precedent with breast cancer and mammography, so we're kind of following that model for prostate cancer screening. And this is our number one ask right now. So our champions in the House, Dr. Larry Bucshon, he is a heart surgeon from Indiana. He sits on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is the committee of jurisdiction that the bill has to go through in the House. Congresswoman Yvette Clarke from New York. She also sits on the Energy and Commerce Committee. She is the lead Democrat, making it bipartisan. And then our two kind of original co-leads, Dr. Neil Dunn from Florida, was a practicing urologist, and Congressman Troy Carter from Louisiana. We're also very close for the first time to having a Senate companion bill. Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey has agreed to lead it, and we think, pretty close to having a Republican signed up, because we want to introduce it as a bipartisan bill that just makes it much easier to move through the Congress.
Thanks, Dylan. To sum up, right, Dylan gave a lot of background, but you don't have to know all of those details. You have to know basically two things. One, cost sharing poses an unnecessary barrier for life-saving early diagnosis for men at high risk. Right? We know that any amount of cost sharing can be the thing that stands between a patient and the receipt of preventive services. We also know that eliminating cost sharing for African American men and men with a family history of prostate cancer can save lives. So we are asking for one thing. We are asking members of Congress to co-sponsor HR 1826, the PSA Screening for Him Act. You might get a couple of questions. Now, the good news is a totally appropriate answer to any question is, I don't know, I'll get back to you on that. Or I don't know, I'll ask the folks at Zero to get back to you on that. That is a perfectly reasonable answer to any question you get, whether you have some background answers or not. But all the same, we're going to give you a couple of questions that are commonly asked about the bill so that you are at least familiar with them, so you aren't caught off guard. So the first one is, does the bill cost anything? Or alternatively, is there a CBO score? The bill does not have a CBO score. It has not been officially assessed by the congressional body that is responsible for assessing bill costs, but it should not have any impact on the federal budget. In fact, we've run this bill in a handful of states as well. They do a slightly different analysis than the federal government does, and they show basically minimal cost on state governments. And they actually have gone ahead and done the analysis for the private sector as well. And we see that for an insurance company, the cost of covering prostate cancer screening without cost sharing for men at high risk, and in fact, even in some cases for more expansive populations, is about 3 cents per member per month. So it's very small. You might also be asked in a related way, who opposes this? Or more specifically, what do the insurance companies think? Since they are typically the most likely to be concerned about this kind of legislation. But again, we have pretty good news in states where we passed the bill in particular, where we've kind of gone through the whole process and gotten to see the local insurance associations' concerns. We find that insurance companies stand up, they say, I don't like mandates, we oppose mandates, and then they sit back down and worry about things that are actually going to have a bigger impact on their bottom line, right? Insurance companies, by and large, have different priorities aside from stopping this. So officially, they don't like it, but they don't spend a lot of time and energy fighting it. So why does this bill focus on just high-risk men? Why not all men? And it's fair to say that our goal long-term is to have this kind of coverage for PSA testing for all men. And in fact, a number of the state bills do just that. But in the current legislative environment, we're focusing first on covering men at high risk, particularly those who have been specifically, clearly, and repeatedly identified in the literature as being at greatest risk, right? We know, and the bodies that make recommendations about preventive screening even know that Black men are much more likely to develop prostate cancer. Men with a first-degree relative with a known genetic alteration in the family, or with a known family history of other cancers shown to be associated with higher prostate cancer risk, all have much higher risk for prostate cancer. And we use our political energy first in kind of a narrow, targeted way to, honestly, in order to be successful, right? They ask how you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. This is our first bite, right? It's why we're focused on insured men, for example, right? Because we have a targeted piece of legislation that can get at this population. And then in the future, we can move on to the next piece and the next piece and the next piece. So what are you going to do? You're going to show up, you've got this meeting scheduled, right? You followed Hal's instructions, you've filled out the form, or you've made a phone call, set up a meeting in the local office. You're going to try and show up 10 minutes early, right? Not 30. Nobody wants somebody sitting in their office for 30 minutes. You'll show up 10 minutes early, introduce yourself, tell them where you're from, thank them for their time. It's a great opportunity to say kind of what your history is in the district, right? You, in fact, went to the same high school as the member of Congress, or what have you. But then you're sharing your story, right? Your story is the one thing that no one else, not me, not Hal, not Dylan, or any of our other colleagues, can tell in a way that has the same emotional weight and impact as it does when it comes from you. Right? So you are sharing your story, this personal, intimate journey of how prostate cancer affected you, your family, your loved ones, your community. And then you're trying, to the extent that you can, to fit it into the context of why screening in particular is so important. right? Because this is really legislation about making sure that people have access to screening. So if you can, context is better, right? That's your 201 version, right? 101 is you share your story. The advanced beginner stage is that you go ahead and fit that story into context around screening. If it had been, if my loved one had been screened earlier, their disease might have been caught at an earlier stage. If my doctor hadn't recommended screening, hadn't known about my family history, I might not have survived, right? It's a great way you want to frame your story if you can. The next thing, and this is probably sharing your story and making the ask, are the two very most important things you do. You share your story, you make the ask. Please co-sponsor HR 1826. Very rarely is that staffer going to say yes to you in the moment. If you're meeting with a member of Congress, they might. But if you're meeting with a staffer, they'll almost never say yes immediately because they need to have a conversation with their boss. But you're going to make the ask. You're going to know that they may not be able to give you a firm answer one way or the other right away. You're going to thank them, and then you're going to follow up, right? You're going to get home from that meeting. You're going to send a thank you note that says, by the way, we talked about this. I really hope you're going to co-sponsor HR 1826. I'm happy to answer other questions if you have them. And then I believe we actually also have a link on our website that will allow you to fill out a form telling me and how I met with so-and-so. We talked about this. They said they were probably going to sign on and you should follow up in 2 weeks. Or they had questions about X, Y, and Z. Can you please follow up? Or they had no questions. It wasn't a great meeting, but I'm going to do this again in a couple of months and we're going to keep up the drumbeat. And eventually they're going to come around and be excited about this legislation. And so you're going to show up, introduce yourself, tell your story, make the ask, say thank you, be on your merry way, and just make sure that you follow up. And I want to always start by offering, actually, I'm going to pause, prepare your questions. You can always put them in the chat and the Q&A, but we've surmounted some of our technical difficulties here. And I want to welcome Joni Lowe to say hello and to tell a little bit of her experience.
Hi, I apologize for being late. Technical difficulties as usual. I received an email, as many of you did, to see if we could get sponsorship or co-sponsorship of HR 7750. As some of you may recall, it's the Prostate Cancer Community Assistance, Research and Education Act. And so I contacted Congressman Peters' office and was transferred to his aide. It's helpful to ask for the health aide. And so I spoke with his health aide, Dylan, and explained the situation. I first told them about how my husband had prostate cancer and the impact this kind of legislation would have with more research and education, particularly in coordinating with federal agencies. After you explain your story and the impact it's had in your life, you go into as much detail as you can about the legislation and let them know, I let them know how much we wanted Congressman Peters' support on this bill. We had a very brief discussion because he had other priorities to get to, but I let him know that I was going to advise zero prostate cancer staff of our conversation and that I will ask them to follow up with him in 2 weeks. And by the way, Dylan was in the district office. I think it's easier to get a hold of someone in the district office, so that's what I did. And so we ended the conversation. I hadn't heard from Dylan in about 3 weeks and heard nothing about whether Congressman Peters co-signed or not. So I sent him an email and let him know, or refreshed him about our conversation, and then asked him if Congressman Peters had signed on. And I was very happy to find out that he did. He signed on to the bill, HR 7750, and he thanked me for giving him information and making him aware of the bill. And so I followed up with another thank you note, letting him know how much the co-sponsorship meant to Zero Prostate Cancer and to those affected by prostate cancer.
That's perfect, Joni. Thank you, Bree. Had you done this before?
I have done this before. I have a history as a lobbyist. And so I've gone back to Washington, D.C. and lobbied members of Congress in the past. So I had a little bit of an advantage in that I've already worked with members of Congress. But nevertheless, I think knowing that you have your own story to tell and the importance of this legislation on others affected by prostate cancer, hopefully will energize you and get you to make that call to the aid of the congressman or senator you're trying to reach.
Thanks, Joni. So you're in the advanced class, but people don't have to be, right? This is
Right.
Right.
Anyone can make that call. Anyone can make that call and just pretend that they're sitting there in their underwear, and you can explain the bill to them and how much the co-sponsorship would mean.
That's exactly right. Thanks, Joni. And we've gotten a couple of good questions in. I don't know if Helen Dillon want to join us back on video here and we can answer some of these. I will say first, Jeff, yes, we are going to provide the slide deck. We'll provide a recording of this webinar. We also have, if you visit www.zerocancer.org/district, we have all of this information, including a one-pager that you can print and bring with you and leave behind, including a longer multi-page document that it gets really deep into some of the background on this legislation. So it's got all the tools you need, and it will also have the recording of this webinar once it's updated. It's not there yet. So we will send all of that. First of all, we'll send it to everyone who registered for the webinar, but it'll also be available on the website. So that's your first one. And then Rick, you've asked if we can say that we represent Zero Prostate Cancer. Absolutely, right? You're here on behalf of Zero Prostate Cancer. In fact, if you print out that material, it's going to say zero. It'll say zero on the top. So it's, obviously branded materials from us, but it's also fair to say that I think we represent the prostate cancer community, right? It's not just Zero, we have support in the larger community, both from organizations, but also, from individuals. So Dylan, we also got a question about whether or not we want to ask senators to join others in writing such a bill. And maybe we can give a quick update on where we are in the Senate and what's useful for people to do.
Yeah, so Senator Booker has agreed to be the Democratic lead. We have a few good leads on Republican co-leads. And then so especially if you're talking to a Republican, please tell them, we're working with Senator Booker, and we would love to have your boss as either an original co-sponsor or potentially the Republican lead on the bill. And then original co-sponsors are always really, really helpful too. If there's someone that wants to be kind of day one, it's a really great show of support. So yes, 100%. The bill, I would say, is it's written. It just needs some people to put their names on it.
And I'll say that if you have a meeting scheduled with your Republican senator in particular, in person, and you want to shoot me an email, Ali, ALI @zerocancer.org ahead of time, we can chat and make sure that we make the most of that, because that is the part that we are still working on, is finding a Republican senator who wants to put their name on it. Thanks, Rick. That was a great question. I hope we answered it for you. So we got a question about whether or not this legislation, whether we'll get questions about addressing all men, right, uninsured or not. And I will actually say two parts to this answer. First, I'll say rarely from a Hill staffer do we get a question saying, what about uninsured men? not because they don't care about uninsured men, not because we don't care about uninsured men, but because the way legislation is written, insurance is regulated in one part of the code, programs that might provide free coverage or kind of other things are going to be covered in different places. So a bill that's kind of narrowly written to address insured men makes logical sense in terms of how it's structured. I'll also say that we do, one of the other pieces that we do work on at Zero is supporting expansion of insurance coverage so that there are fewer people who are uninsured, right? So that we are building, rather than kind of building Band-Aids that are intended to address an unequal system, we're trying to create a more equal system and then to make sure that that system provides the coverage necessary. So I'll say that about insurance. And I do appreciate that, there are men of all different races and ethnicities who may have that family history, who may be at higher risk for other reasons because of the history. And we didn't go into, I'll apologize, we didn't go into the depth of this history. It would probably take another 20 minutes. I think we actually have a video on our website that's about 20 minutes long, going into the deep history on where exactly the recommendations about coverage and for whom come from. But the bodies that make recommendations for coverage have very specifically called out Black men and men with a family history. We know that's where the data is the strongest. And so by focusing narrowly on that, we've avoided accusations of either making the bill too expensive or too expansive. So I hear it. It's an unsatisfying answer to go back to taking one bite of the elephant at a time. But as a political strategy goes, it's where we believe we're most likely to be successful. So that is, and as a general rule, if you're talking to a Hill staffer, they do understand the idea that we're being narrow, we're being targeted, we're getting at the biggest challenges first, because that's an effective way to move a policy forward. So I hope that answer helps. I will offer one more important reminder. That is, what's our ask? Cost sharing is an unnecessary barrier. Eliminating cost sharing for men at highest risk can save lives. And so we want people to co-sponsor HR 1826, the PSA Screening for Him Act. And again, you can find all of this information at www.zerocancer.org/district. And you'll also receive a follow-up email that has links to everything you need, all the tools you might want. We can't send you a printer, but at least that document that you can print out and take by hand with you to your meeting, as well as background videos and far more information than you may ever want or need to talk about this legislation. So thank you very much for your time. We look forward to talking to you again soon, and we hope to hear follow-up emails from everyone about how wonderfully their meetings went. So thank you and have a great day.